I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. We're tracking new developments in the horrific mass shooting at an elementary school in Texas. Here's what we know right now. Investigators say an 18-year-old gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers after storming into Robb Elementary School in the city of Uvalde, west of San Antonio. Investigators now confirm the shooter was armed with an AR-15 style rifle and died in a shootout with law enforcement. President Biden addressed the nation last night, expressing outrage at lawmakers blocking efforts to pass new gun control measures. He's now ordered flags at the White House and other federal grounds to fly at half-staff. The attack is the second deadliest school shooting in our nation's history. And now we're learning more about how it all unfolded and what happened before the shooter reached the school. Amy Robach starts us off from outside Robb Elementary.
The devastating new details after a gunman opened fire here at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas.
We need to respond to South Grove and Mill Street to establish a perimeter.
19 students and 2 teachers killed.
My heart was broken today. We're a small community, and we'll need your prayers to get us through this.
Before entering the school, gunman 18-year-old Salvador Ramos, a student at Uvalde High School, shot his grandmother at her residence. She is now in critical condition.
We were the first ones to hear the gunshot. We're right behind her house.
Shortly after, the suspect crashed his car outside of the school premises where he engaged with law enforcement. Then, at 11:32 a.m. Central Time, the suspect, wearing body armor, abandoned his vehicle and entered the school, where 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders were in the middle of the school day. The gunman opening fire as soon as he stepped on school grounds. Students reportedly scrambling out of windows to escape.
We just hear all kinds of gunshots going off, like nonstop, like constantly gunshots. And then we're over here all scared on the ground, fearing for our lives.
4th grader Jordan Legis telling ABC News about the moments when the gunman began firing shots at his classroom.
When he sees the students and our teacher, that's when he starts shooting at the window.
Authorities confirming the suspect was armed with an AR-15 style rifle. Sources telling ABC News all the victims at the school died in the same location inside the school. Officers arrive on the scene and begin exchanging gunfire with the shooter, while some parents rush toward the scene in desperation.
Hey, it's okay. We're right here. Go inside, go inside.
And in an address to the nation, President Biden offering any and all assistance.
I'd hoped when I became president I would not have to do this again. Another massacre. How many scores of little children who witness what happened see their friends die as if they're on a battlefield, for God's sake? They'll live with the rest of their lives.
Now, after the shooting, dozens of relatives and friends gathered at the town's convention center, where officials had to take DNA samples to aid in identifying the victims here in the school behind me. Diane?
Unbelievable. Amy Robach, thank you. And we're learning more about the victims, those 19 elementary school children and 2 teachers killed. Maria Villarreal is at Uvalde Memorial Hospital, where some of the survivors are being treated.
The world remembering those lost in that horrific fatal shooting. 4th grade teacher Eva Mireles, a mom to daughter Adeline, taught at the Uvalde School District for 17 years before losing her life Tuesday. According to her bio on the district's website, she loved running, hiking, and biking. Audrey Garcia's daughter Gabby was a former student of hers.
Doing whatever she could do to help Gabby. That's the kind of thing she did every day.
One of the 19 children killed, Amarillo Garza, who turned 10 2 weeks ago. Angel Garza telling ABC News in a statement, "My little love is now flying high with the angels above." The family of 4th grader Javier XJ Lopez sharing the news of his passing. His mom had attended his end-of-the-year awards ceremony earlier Tuesday, not knowing that would be the last time they'd see him. His grandmother speaking on the phone to ABC News.
It's just so hard. You send your kids to school and thinking they're going to make it back home, and they're not.
More than a dozen others injured, including 2 police officers, shot while responding, but expected to survive. Customs and Border Patrol Chief Jason Owens says a colleague was hit with gunfire while engaging the suspect, but is doing well.
In the worst of times, you also get to see the very best in people.
We've been here for several hours, and we were able to see shift change earlier this morning.
And we notice that a lot of the people here that work at the hospital walking in still with somber faces, still trying to process exactly what has happened in their community. But one thing they did tell us as they walked in was they are getting an outpouring of love and support from around the world. It is coming in food, in drinks, in special gift bags and messages. And this is what they are taking comfort in right now, knowing that they are not alone in this tragedy. Diane?
All right, Maria Villarreal, thank you. And President Biden addressed the nation last night, saying no other country faces the same problem with mass shootings.
These kinds of mass shootings never happen with the kind of frequency they happen in America. Why? Why are we willing to live with this carnage? Why do we keep letting this happen? Where in God's name is our backbone to have the courage to deal with it and stand up to the lobbies?
Chief White House correspondent Cecilia Vega has more on that for us. Hi, Cecilia.
Hey, Diane. Yeah, President Biden had barely been on the ground here at the White House for a little more than an hour after he landed from that Asia trip before he had to make this address to the nation. And listen to this. It's the second time in the span of a single week that he has had to make an address like this in the wake of a mass shooting in this country. We were talking about a president who was grieving, and we were talking about a president who is very angry right now. He's been talking about gun control for decades in this country as vice president. In fact, he was put in charge of the White House response to the massacre in Sandy Hook. But the reality is there has not been meaningful gun reform legislation in this country in nearly 30 years. President Biden has taken executive action since taking office on guns, but even he is conceding at this point there's not much more he can do on that front. So he is really calling on Congress to act. But it ends up being the same plea we often hear from so many in the wake of these time and time again. Now, the reality is the Senate could at some point vote on background checks, but Democrats don't have the votes on that one yet. So as we always say after one of these, gun control remains stalled on Capitol Hill. There is, Diane, frustration mounting on both sides of the aisle. Take a look at the senator from Connecticut on the Senate floor just yesterday. Of course, he represents the state where that Sandy Hook massacre occurred.
What are we doing? What are we doing? Just days after a shooter walked into a grocery store to gun down African-American patrons, we have another Sandy Hook on our hands. What are we doing? There have been more mass shootings than days in the year. Our kids are living in fear every single time they set foot in a classroom because they think they're going to be next. What are we doing?
And then you've got the flip side, Ted Cruz from Texas, where just hours after these 19 kids and their teacher were murdered in their school, blaming the media, blaming Democrats for what he says is politicizing the issue, saying in times like these, they try to restrict the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. So, Diane, when you ask where do things stand right now, I'll tell you, they stand in exactly the same place as they have stood for decades, with lawmakers in this city facing this question: when will enough actually be enough?
All right, Cecilia Vega at the White House, thank you. And we are now hearing from the grandfather of the shooter. He told our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, that if he knew what his grandson was planning, he would have turned him into police himself.
I hate when I see all the news, all those people that get shot. I'm against all that. I say, why do they let these people buy guns and all that?
If you could have done anything differently, would you have done?
I didn't know he had weapons or nothing or this or that there. If I would have known, I would have reported him.
You would have reported your own grandson?
Yes, because I'm against all that.
Again, that was the shooter's grandfather. Authorities say the gunman shot his grandmother, that man's wife, in the head before attacking the elementary school. Meanwhile, investigators say they're working to determine what drove him to carry out this attack. Matt Gutman has more from Uvalde, Texas.
Authorities telling ABC News the shooter legally purchased 2 AR variant long guns within a week of his 18th birthday.
What happened in Uvalde is a horrific tragedy that cannot be tolerated in the state of Texas.
His classmates at Uvalde High School telling ABC News the suspect was known for fighting and threatening classmates. Nathan Romo, who had witnessed part of the shooting, had once been friends with him.
What did you do to prompt him to say, "I'll kill you"?
Nothing. I used to be his friend, but then I told him, like,
that I wasn't gonna start being his friend no more because like he was being weird with like not only me but like a lot of other people.
Several classmates telling us the suspect rarely went to school, and when he did, he sometimes frightened students like Ureli Vasquez.
He had scars on his face, and I remember somebody asking him, like, what happened? Are you okay? Because he showed up to school with them, and he just straight out told them, you know, with a smile, I did it myself because I like how it looks.
Vasquez had also worked with him at a restaurant. Now, investigators working to determine how and when the gunman assembled his arsenal, which included AR-15s, body armor, and numerous magazines.
So what we do know, when he did make entry into the school and he was shooting children and adults and teachers, we did have several police officers that made entry and actually were met with gunfire by the suspect.
Authorities saying he shot his grandmother before he headed to Robb Elementary School and unleashed that deadly assault. That school, part of a district with robust security measures in place, including lockdown protocols, threat assessment teams, and a digital program to monitor social media threats. But the shooter allegedly leaving a trail of disturbing social media posts, hinting at an attack. Investigators now poring over the gunman's accounts, where he reportedly sent videos and photos of guns to other users, even images of animal abuse. As recently as Tuesday morning, an Instagram account believed to be connected to the shooter sending a photo of a gun laying on a bed to another user. Law enforcement also reviewing screenshots of messages the suspect allegedly sent a different Instagram user, tagging them in an image of firearms. And then the day before the shooting, the gunman also reportedly saying on the platform Yubo, "Wait till tomorrow." Now a community searching for answers.
What is also a question that is on the minds of the 5 fellow classmates of this suspect, the neighbors here, a dozen of with whom I've spoken, is how they missed all of the signals of what seems to have been a prototypical lone shooter, somebody who didn't talk to others, who almost never went to school, who seemed to enjoy inflicting pain on himself, on classmates, on animals, and how all of these warning signs were missed. Diane.
All right, Matt Gutman, thank you. And the violence in Uvalde comes just a week and a half after deadly mass shootings at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, and a church in Southern California. They're all part of a surge in mass shootings in America in the past few years. Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas has more on that. Pierre?
Right now, I'm sure a lot of people at home are wondering if we're seeing something different in society as it relates to mass shootings where 4 or more people are injured or killed in an incident, in active shooter scenarios where a gunman shows up at a populated area and begins firing. The answer is a resounding yes. Last year, there were 60 active shooter incidents. That's nearly 4 times as many as there were in 2013. As far as mass shootings, we've seen a spike tied to the pandemic. In 2019, there were 417 mass shootings. By last year, the number had jumped to 693. These are incredible increases happening in a relatively short period of time. Police I'm talking to say we've got to do something about keeping guns, especially assault rifles, out of the hands of these mass shooters, and we've got to do a better job identifying these shooters before they kill. Time and time again, we see signals missed. These shooters have said something to family or friends, or they posted something of concern on social media. It's a daunting task because, let me be clear, there are hundreds of millions of guns already in circulation, and every year millions more are sold. So this is raising the question of how social media companies are paying attention to what's being published on their platforms, but it's all complicated, involving questions of free speech. The critical issue is, when does free speech morph into clear indications of impending violence? And we all have an obligation to reach out to authorities if someone seems to be heading toward an act of violence. Diane?
Hard to tell the difference for sure, Pierre. Thank you. And that trail of social media posts hinting at an attack are reminiscent of those that came before other mass shootings, including the one in Buffalo, New York, just over a week ago. Let's bring in senior investigative reporter Aaron Katersky, along with ABC News contributor Elizabeth Newman, a former Homeland Security official under the Trump administration, for more on this. Aaron, what are law enforcement officers looking into when they're examining these social media posts?
They're looking for any hints that could have said, okay, this is why. What was the triggering event in this young man's life that may have led him to do this? They're also looking to see whether he mentioned this to anybody else in a meaningful way, such that someone else may well be involved. At this point, they don't think so. They believe that this particular shooter acted alone, but they have been tracking down acquaintances, friends, and relatives to try and broaden out their understanding of the young man. They are also looking at that trail of social media posts that indicates someone who may have been prone to violence, to harming himself and potentially others, his record of truancy at school, and whether, if in fact that social media post turns out to be true, he predicted this in advance.
Now, Elizabeth, there seems to be a pattern in some of the deadliest mass shootings over the past few years where law enforcement apparently missed warning signs. What do you make of that, and that sort of the distinction between what qualifies as a warning sign and what more do you think needs to be done here?
Well, I think Pierre was talking about the challenge we have with First Amendment protections and speech and what law enforcement can do. And it is true. We have a number of examples. El Paso comes to mind, Buffalo most recently, possibly also this. We don't know enough yet. If he had been reported on. But in all of these cases, you had indications that this is a socially isolated, disaffected young man who is obsessed with violence. Those are strong warning signs. In the case of El Paso, the mother reached out to 911 and said, "I'm concerned." And the 911 operator's answer was, well, you know, if he's over 18, he's allowed to have guns under the Second Amendment. There's got to be better answers for this. And there have been, over the last 10 to 15 years, research and science around behavior to be able to better equip the public with awareness of what it looks like when somebody is exhibiting concerning behavior. And we need systems in place that come alongside law enforcement. I'm not suggesting we don't need law enforcement. We do, but they are limited in what they can do if somebody hasn't committed a criminal act. But meanwhile, there are a whole host of things that we know we can do to help these individuals who are struggling. They're not, I'm not, again, this is not necessarily a mental illness, but there are other factors that have happened in their life that if we come alongside them before they commit that criminal act, we can prevent a lot of this. But we have to equip the community with awareness, and we have to build systems to be able to engage and intervene before somebody crosses that criminal threshold.
So, Aaron, where does this investigation go from here, given the shooter was killed in this case, unlike in Buffalo, for example, where they have a suspect in custody?
And where they had to painstakingly go through the evidence so they could prepare a prosecution. Here, that isn't going to be the case, although they will want to collect all of the evidence from what I'm told is a gruesome scene inside that school. They spent the better part of the night notifying all the families, and we've just started to see those little faces. And so that's where their focus is right now, on victims and the families. They believe that since this shooter acted alone, there is no follow-on threat. But to Elizabeth's point, they're going to want a broader understanding of the shooter so that perhaps they can see if there were any warning signs or get messages out to the community and to the country about what to look for in the future. But all of these investigations in all these shootings fail to prevent the next one.
They do. Aaron Katursky, Elizabeth Newman, thank you both. And thank you at home for joining us. We're going to be right back with more of the day's other top stories. Welcome back. Key candidates backed by President Trump were soundly defeated in Tuesday's high-stakes political primaries, especially in the state of Georgia. Governor Brian Kemp sailed to victory despite Trump calling for his ouster after he refused to get in the way of the 2020 presidential election results. In the most consequential race that will determine how they run elections in Georgia, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger beat Trump-backed Congressman Jody Hice to win a re-election. But Trump's pick for Senate, former Georgia football legend, Heisman Trophy winner Herschel Walker, did win the nomination, setting him up for a matchup with Senator Raphael Warnock in November. Let's bring in White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks in Atlanta for more on all of this. Mary Alice, this race between Walker and Warnock will be a historic showdown between two black men who could tip the balance of power in Washington. So what are you watching for from now until November?
Yeah, Diane, you're exactly right. The stakes could not be higher for Georgians, for the whole country, with the balance of the Senate at stake, like you said. And I think everyone's going to be watching to see whether Walker will debate Warnock. Walker refused to debate his other Republican challengers, and he has some controversial moments from his past that people want answers about. They want him to address, and I think that, you know, he has a tough race ahead of him. Warnock is incredibly popular in this state. Remember, Warnock actually won by a much bigger margin than Biden did, so it's going to be a close one.
Now, Georgia voters have chosen their candidates for governor and secretary of state who refused Trump's calls to overturn the 2020 election results. So is this a sign that Republicans want to move on from those false claims that the election was stolen, or at least in this state?
I think absolutely, Diane. That's what we heard from people here on the ground. And the results really show that. I think the biggest example is the one that you identified there, the Secretary of State's race. Brad Raffensperger was the Republican that made national headlines for really standing up to President Trump after the 2020 election, for refusing to deny the election results, by standing by the election results, standing by the recounts and the audits. And Trump went hard to try to replace him. He spent a lot of time and a lot of money actively campaigning against him, and yet Raffensperger able to hold on to his job. To me, the message there is that Georgia voters are really not interested in those election lies, or at least that is not enough to motivate them to the polls. Diane.
And Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene won her primary despite an effort to remove her from the ballot entirely over her alleged role in the January 6th assault on the Capitol. How likely is she to hold on to her seat?
Yeah, that's right, Dan. And pretty likely. That's a really red district, a pretty safe district for her. And so far, the judge in that case has just said he has not seen enough evidence that would suggest he should limit her access on the ballot. So most likely she will be on the ballot unless there's all of a sudden new evidence or a big appeal. That's a pretty safe district for her.
Now, you've been following these races for weeks. What's your overall take on the results?
You know, I wasn't really surprised by the final results, except the margins. I was really shocked that Republican Governor Brian Kemp was able to win so resoundingly, a 50-point margin between him and Senator Perdue, his primary challenger, who had the backing of President Trump. Again, Trump was really active in this state, was calling into rallies, was giving money. The fact that Kemp was able to win with such a big margin was interesting to me. And same with the Secretary of State's race. Raffensperger not only won, but he won with over 50% of the Republican vote there. There will not be a runoff. So really, those margins were interesting to me. Diane.
All right, Mary Alice Parks for us in Atlanta. Thank you. And we will be right back with more of the day's other top stories. Welcome back to ABC News Live. The CDC has issued a new alert about the COVID-19 treatment Paxlovid, warning healthcare providers that patients treated with the antiviral may experience rebounding symptoms after initially feeling better. The CDC says most people who experience this rebound have mild illness, and that patients should re-isolate for at least 5 days and wear a mask for 10 days after the symptoms return. A second shipment from Operation Fly Formula is set to arrive in the U.S. this afternoon amid the nationwide baby formula shortage. Today's shipment contains enough formula for roughly 1 million 8-ounce bottles. The First Lady and Surgeon General are expected to be on hand when that shipment arrives later today in Washington, D.C. President Biden is set to issue an executive order on police reform today on the second anniversary of the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. Biden is expected to direct federal law enforcement agencies to revise their use of force policies. Members of Floyd's family, as well as family members of Breonna Taylor and Elijah McClain, will be there for the signing. I'm Diane Macedo. Do stay with us. We'll be right back with more news, context, and analysis.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.